welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rita Cronise, and I am the coordinator of the Virtual Community of Practice for the Academy of Peer Services. I also wanted to mention, which is my project, the Virtual Community of Practice, which takes it beyond the online learning into the real world of jobs, connection, communication, and collaboration. Our community of practice features over 200 new jobs each month in the state of New York. We have a newsletter, we have a calendar of events that are happening, and now in the world as it's changed, there's a lot of online events that are being posted there. We have links to peer warm lines and peer support lines, online peer support groups that are happening now all the time. And we just wanted to call attention to a new resource that's been put out available by the Office of Mental Health, which is an emotional support line. This emotional support line that you see here is fully staffed by peers and volunteers who can reach out to anybody who's having an emotional, who's in emotional distress during this challenging period of time. So, without further ado, I just want to welcome every one of you to our Faces and Places of Peer Support series. We do a monthly webinar on different organizations and different services that are being provided by peers. And today's is going to be a wonderful presentation, and we're glad you're here to join us. Just want to begin the webinar. This is Supporting Older Adults Part 2. Transitions. This is a collaborative effort between the Coalition for Behavioral Health, and today's presenters are from the Coalition. Clinton Green will be moderating the conversation. Liz Breier will be managing the chat, and our presenters for today are Gayle Bluebird, Celia Brown, Richard Laudor, Deb Trueheart, Shanti Vani, and Michelle Zechner. I wanted to give just a very brief introduction to who each of these folks are. So Gayle Bluebird is a leader in the movement. She's a historian and she's a creativity rebel. Celia Brown is a movement leader and activist. She was the first peer support, civil service peer specialist. She also is a historian and she's a coordinator for the New York Office of Mental Health, regional advocacy specialist. Richard Laudor is an older person himself, and he is a peer specialist in the service program for older people, which is a personalized recovery-oriented services program or PROS program. He also is a Howie the Hart graduate of 2017. Deb Trueheart is a consultant, a speaker, a holistic counselor, an emotional CPR trainer, and she has also collaborated with Gayle Bluebird on an arts course, which is part of our Academy of Peer Services. And what I forgot to get to mention is that Bluebird is just an amazing advocate for the arts. She has done such amazing work in trying to bring together the arts community, and she continues to do that work even now. And then Shanti Vani is a peer, and she is also an end-of-life doula who will be providing some information about transitions and how we support people through transitions. And Michelle Zechner is faculty at Rutgers University. She's committed to aging well for all, and she's also a dedicated cat mom. She's a researcher who will be talking in a little bit about some of the research behind supporting older adults. And let me just back up for 1 second to Clinton and Liz. Clinton is a senior and implementation specialist, a licensed social worker, and a certified benefits practitioner with the Coalition. And Liz is a senior trainer and implementation specialist, a certified peer specialist, and a certified psychiatric rehab practitioner. And she is also a certified health coach. Just a quick recap from our last session. We did a whole webinar on supporting older adults through really helping them to recognize their strengths. And something beautiful that came out of that particular webinar was a pure example of peer support that was happening between Gayle Bluebird and Deb Trueheart. Just the peer support that was needed in order to be able to put on that portion of the webinar. And if you haven't seen that webinar yet, it was a real play because it was a real life what was happening in real life for the two of them then. And I would like to, as I stop my share here, I would like to invite Bluebird and Deb to continue that conversation for a little bit longer before we launch into the actual webinar, because it's such a powerful example of what peer support can look like with and between older adults. Thank you.
There you are.
All right.
It's good to see you, Bluebird. So,
Hi, Deb. Hi, Deb.
we wanted to, hi, Gayle. We wanted to just start where we left off before. In the last time we had this opportunity to speak with one another, and we've had a few conversations in the last few days. And I'm aware that in the last webinar, you were feeling some anxiety before the webinar, and you called me and asked if I could be on and to be able to support you a little. And then when we got it, we decided we would just do a conversation. And then when we got on the call, we've talked since, and you revealed to me that you felt like you really masked some of what was going on for you at the time. And I was wondering if you just wanted to speak a little bit about that.
Well, if you recall, Deb, I called you, and I think the word was in desperation, really. And I didn't want to do the webinar particularly. I didn't feel up to it, and I asked you if you would do it for me. Really, that's part of it. And then kind of things led to the fact that, well, let's just be where we are. And so I was given the opportunity to be in a kind of state that wasn't enjoyable and not one that I would have planned. So here we are again. And so I want to talk a little bit about what was going on then. I had been crying, as I had told you, for several days. I'm still not sure all of what was going on. I think there were some things happening here in the house that had upset me. But the sort of feelings increased. And pretty soon I was in kind of a withdrawal pattern, in my bed, crying, back into a position of which I'm very familiar with, and have had many times like this, starting, I guess, through, in childhood. So I was feeling like little orphan Annie, as my mother used to call me, and like the orphan that I felt myself to be, a person that was very needy. That's been one of the descriptions. Just not feeling like I belonged, feeling disconnected. Feeling another thing that was going on was the virus. Well, suppose, I live in a house here, apartment building with 200 people. So the question is, what if I am positive, would cause the whole house to be on quarantine. So all those things were kind of going on. And one thing that happened too is I went back and listened to the conversation that we had. You were going to be the warm line sort of support person. And instead, I kind of talked about what some of the issues are about being in old age. So now I'm trying to be honest again and say, well, it was a hard time. And then when I called you, there was another surprising aspect to this. I'm thinking, oh, Deb Trueheart, my friend, she's just like amazing, which you are. And but oddly enough, you were also having some difficulty. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, thanks, Bluebird. It was interesting to me to hear that you called me thinking, that I would be the person that's all put together, and, I would be the person that's positive and, whatever. And you were surprised that, no, I wasn't. And I was surprised that I wasn't, because what had happened in my life is that I was going full steam ahead. After years of being pretty compromised with some health challenges in the last year and a half, I've gotten healthier and then more involved. And I've been involved in some projects here in Sarasota County, trauma-informed community development initiatives, and I had become a trainer for the Emotional Cpr, and I was going full steam ahead with all of these meetings and with, trying to do community development, and I was feeling passionate and I was feeling excited, and I was loving the fact that, that I was staying healthy enough to do all of this, and also really recognizing that my health depended on that kind of meaningful interaction. That when I feel passionate about something, when I feel as though I'm having a sense of meaning and purpose, I stay healthier. And when I connect with people that I really resonate with, that helps me stay healthy. And then all of a sudden, it was like I slammed into, it's like, I feel like it was like a cartoon. I was like in the Roadrunner cartoon where, I was just running full speed ahead, and I slammed into like an invisible wall and just slid down the wall, and my response was that I just went into this place of nothing. It just felt like I was this big blob. I was sleeping all the time. I could not motivate myself. There were plenty of things, this was a great opportunity now to have the space and the time to finish my workbook or to finish my website or to, there were so many things that I could have done, including, creativity things, but I couldn't motivate myself to do anything. I just really couldn't. And in both of our lives, something happened that shifted us out of that place. And for me, it was that I got a phone call inviting me to be a trainer, that now the National Empowerment Center is doing virtual Zoom trainings. And I was given the opportunity to be the lead trainer in eCPR training that's coming up for the Gainesville Respite Center. And that was like somebody calling me out of that space and calling me into a skill that I had. And that was really helpful. And in your life, something happened in a similar way. I was wondering if you want to tell us about that.
So I don't know how long it was, maybe a week, that I hadn't really been in contact with people, not calling them, not on Facebook. And a very close friend of mine, who also had been my roommate, called me and said, Gayle, I haven't seen your poems on Facebook, and I'm missing seeing your poems. And so that was like something very important to me. I told her kind of how I was doing and some of the things that I was having trouble with. And she said, Gayle, she said, you go through this a lot and then you always come through. You always come through. And I do that when I'm engaged in some of these activities. I think I can't do them. I'm not sure I want to. But the words "you always come through" also resonated with me. So I started using that as a little mantra, like you can get through this. I've helped a lot of people also get through it, and realize that part of it has to do with setting up very simple steps for myself. So I have a little dog. Her name is May May, and she's the most loved in the house, of course. She really is. But she was a big comfort for me. So one of the things I have to do every day is take May May for a walk, and that was a task that was important that I had to do. I think I read a compelling mystery book. I started doing simple tasks. I made a banana bread. I started seeing people in the halls, and when they asked me how I was, I would say, well, I'm there. But in this environment, many of our people are isolating and secluding themselves, and maybe are, we don't always know, not doing well. So it's an easy place to hide. Plus, we were all wearing masks. That was another thing, and I had trouble wearing the mask, and because it felt like another level of hiding. Here I was hiding a depression, and then I'm wearing a mask, which also hides me, and so there was just a lot of fear involved that not all of which I can pinpoint. The other thing we mentioned last time was I have a little nickname here. I have a very close friend that lives here who's an artist, and so she calls me the Underground Rebel. And that's because both of us are on the council, and we always are the ones, me really lead the APS in terms of challenging things, being advocates, seeing what we can do with this, being unusual creative. So, I knew that creative part of me, and I started writing poems again. That was also very important to me. And little by little, here I am. I think I've come through.
I'm sorry to interrupt, ladies, and this is it's a wonderful component to what we're talking about today, but we have about another minute or so, just so we can wrap this up and you guys can definitely get out the points that you would like to get out.
Well, I think the point of my presentation is that it's okay. It was okay, the space I was in, and it's okay to come through that. And for the most part, I have been able to do that. And I'm kind of fun little me with my hats again. Deb?
Thank you. Thanks, Bluebird. And it's really been delightful to just be with you through this process, because we've had several conversations offline. And I just want to make the point of when I was in that space, it really took someone else to sort of reach in and remind me of who I am. It's really important to just be with people where they are, but also hold up a mirror and invite people back to themselves, because we can get really lost in that place that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to share with each other and with you.
Thanks, Deb.
And thank you both for being vulnerable and sharing your experiences with us as we talk about transitions and what that's like in your own personal transitions. For a lot of folks, especially individuals who have experienced trauma, having that choice and voice taken away and then having to transition to kind of where we are now may have been challenging. So I invite everyone to contribute in our chat box to talk about some of the transitions they might have experienced, either personally or professionally. I know for myself, I've experienced both in the last couple of weeks in being in quarantine here in New York City, and had to redefine, reorient about kind of what my routine and what my wellness looks like. So we invite you to go into the chat and discuss or list any chats in the chat box, any transitions that you may be experiencing. And while you're doing that, I will introduce one of our co-presenters, Michelle, and she will talk about some of the research and data about transition.
Thanks so much, Clinton, and thanks, Deb and Gayle. These are really trying times, and I think that the first section really illustrated a lot of the transitions that are taking place right now for so many people. I do want to point out some things from the research and what we typically see for people who are, as we age, what kinds of transitions we might go through. It might be things like housing, and that might be the type of housing that a person is living in. They may need to go somewhere where they receive a little more support or help. But if they do move, that might mean relocating to a new town. It also might mean needing to downsize and get rid of some of our belongings, which can be very stressful. Some transitions are related to physical abilities and physical health, meaning it's harder to do things as we get older, whatever those things are for daily life. There can also be transitions around retirement or loss of volunteer opportunities or other changes in daily life that are related to becoming a certain age. It might be aging out of services or housing. I know some housing locations say you have to be a certain age in order to enter, or you can't be beyond a certain age to stay there. Also, a common issue really is loss of similar aged family or friends, which can lead us to fewer connections and risk for social isolation. And that can also lead us to a risk for bereavement, the loss of the people or even pets that we love. And many of these transitions lead us to a kind of sense of loss and loss of control and feelings of overall sadness, which might be even worse now during the COVID when many of us are reaching out via Zoom. I forgot to mention one transition that some of my colleagues pointed out to me earlier, and the transition to social connection via technology can be quite daunting for someone who is just learning how to Zoom, say, or just learning how to use Facebook or other social media. I do want to end on the idea that transitions as we age can also offer wonderful opportunities to explore our purpose and meaning in life, what our values are, and our spiritual connections, and sort of a sense of what might be important in our lives. I really think that the literature offers a great framework that peers offer great support and connection during these challenging times and during the challenge of transition as people get older. That's what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Michelle. And everything you said is exactly on point, especially about individuals learning or having to reorient themselves to social connections in this new world. So I'm going to invite some of my other colleagues on this call to talk about their own experiences with transition, especially during this time. Richard, do you want to start?
I'll be happy to, as long as people can see and hear me. I went through a long transition in the mental health system. And when I came to a certain point in recovery, I found myself in Howie the Harp. And I got interested in geriatric mental health. And one of the reasons that I got interested in geriatric mental health is that I am an older person. I'm 62, The program where I work, we call it SPOP, and it's a PROS program, particular kind of recovery-based program that we have in New York. We're the only PROS program that is specifically for older adults, 55 plus. So I am both a peer with lived experience in the mental health system, and I'm a peer older adult. And I find it rewarding to work with fellow baby boomers who are all experiencing a kind of passing of the torch from dominating the culture as we have for so many years, because there are so many of us, to people that have different points of reference, that different forms of work, are very much into technology. And most of us are not, and we have a way of feeling left out. And that's one of the things that I deal with both myself and with my clients. Coming into the COVID situation, the closure of our site where we came together and our movement to providing services remotely has shaken up the central aspect of our program as not just a mental health treatment center, but also as kind of a senior center, and it has that pleasant atmosphere. And I found two interesting things that happened among my clients that contrast. One of them is I have two clients offhand that each lives alone, who are having a lot of trouble with isolation. And the irony was not lost on them that they've been working on isolating less and socializing more, and now they're being told to isolate. They also kid that they're pretty good at isolating. But to isolate to that extent when you already have that problem is really a difficult experience. And then we have the group of people that live in senior residences, or senior mental health residences. And those people are stuck all day in the residence, which is usually a social setting for them. They get meals delivered to their rooms. They can't watch television. They can do this and they can do that, but it's a heavily regimented life. And it's the kind of thing that we in the peer movement have been trying to take mental health away from. And I think people who work with the aging have also been trying to get away from that kind of model.
Great point, Richards. I just want to let you know that you have about another minute or so.
And I'm about done, Clinton. The part where I talk more about myself is just as well lost.
No, definitely not at all. I think your own story is important as well. And I think perhaps when we do the next seminar, we could become more known about your story. But, and what you're saying is so true, especially nowadays. We have worked so hard about helping individuals not to isolate. And now we're telling folks to isolate. So I think those contradictions are very, very important. What I would like to do now is if Celia Brown, who again is the first civil peer support specialist in New York State, would like to talk about transitions and what it's been like for her over the last couple of months.
Hi, Clinton, and I love that background. You have to teach me how to do that. Oh my God, beautiful. Hi, everyone. The transition has been somewhat tough. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes I'm feeling really safe being at home, that You know, I'm not exposed to others who might have the virus. But it can be very scary too, because you don't know when this will end and you'll be able to go out, whatever normal is going to be. But I want to focus a little bit on older adults. First of all, I want to say that I've always respected my elders. And I don't have a lot of elders today, but when they were here, their knowledge and their wisdom has always stuck with me. Right now, I kind of take care of my mom. She lives in a different apartment in my building, but she hasn't left the house since this happened. And I feel joy in helping her with groceries or going to the pharmacy. But I do worry about her because she's not into Zoom or email. And I just wonder what are like some activities that I could suggest to her that might be helpful so she doesn't get so depressed or feel really isolated. And I want to say also that many of you know that I really believe in peer support. And I think that I've been able to deliver that. Every Friday I have a peer specialist meeting with peers that work for the state psychiatric hospitals, and we're really supporting each other. I know it's very tough for all of us, but especially for them when they're not able to see the patients. So we're trying to think of ways that they can be helpful. I should say, I don't know if I said at the beginning, that I'm working at home. So it has its advantages and disadvantages too. I mean, I'm not able to touch people that I normally see at a meeting, or, you know, so I really miss that. I guess in closing, what I'd like to say is I think that this transition, especially for myself and mostly for older adults, is going to be very tough. And I think that they are one of our valuable resources. And sometimes it makes me sad that that's not how the society treats them. And it is very valuable to everyone. And I just hope that we'll be able to remember how important they are in our lives. So thank you, Clinton.
No, thank you, Celia. And we'll invite, when we have our next, you'll have more to say
Okay,
in our other additional segments.
All right. Thank you, Clinton.
But thank you for that, especially. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're talking about, is how to connect older adults with supports in their communities as much as we can. Some of the rituals that we used to have are no longer, we're no longer able to do in those ways, and finding ways to connect folks to supports that we maybe have not been used to connecting folks to, and supporting them in ways we might not have been used to doing so, I think are so important today. So I'm gonna just kick it over really quickly to my colleague, Liz, who's been diligently monitoring the chat. Anything that's come up?
Yeah, not, hi everyone. Not questions so much, just some comments. I did want to just, and Celia, it was really great to see your face, by the way. Wanted to highlight from our earlier segment just some of the really wonderful things that came out in that role play that was technically based on a real exchange that happened about just how beautiful peer support is. Its flexibility, its adaptability, being able to stay in the present and be accepting of folks right where they're at, but also recognizing strengths. And I believe the analogy that was used was holding a mirror up was beautiful, to remind you of who you are. It was really reminded me of why I value peer support so much. So I just wanted to highlight that. in terms of the chat, what we're seeing basically is just a lot of commentary on some of the transitions folks are going through, the challenges of dealing with tech. Some folks find it easy, some folks are finding it more challenging. We had one individual who commented that there's challenges around moving to a new area, being unsure of the resources, and then assisting parents who are also aging, and for some of the other folks, grandparents who are also aging. Some challenges, folks are being laid off, so that came up in the chat. And then just some health issues that people are experiencing, and some side effects, I guess, of the current place that we're at, insomnia, things of that nature. So that's what we have so far.
Thanks, Liz. And again, where we are right now, all those things need to be acknowledged. I know for myself, it took me a while to get back to a place of wellness, and to kind of adjust to this transition. I will acknowledge I am privileged enough to be able to work from home and still be employed. But these transitions, again, considering they were abrupt and involuntary, as well as other losses people are experiencing right now. So what I would like to do right now is introduce one of my other colleagues, as well as a moment of self-disclosure. So I had my cousin's partner recently pass away from the virus. And not being able to comfort her in the way that traditionally that I might have. So I would also like to do is introduce one of my colleagues, Shanti, who is an end-of-life doula who helps people in a different stage, but as they approach the end of their lives, to be as in a place as clear as possible. And again, acknowledging that dying is a natural part of life, and legacy work is a way to help people to share what gives their lives meaning. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Shanti.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay. All right, thank you. Yes, my experience as an end-of-life doula began when I was trained in June of 2018 after my mother died. She had Alzheimer's and I cared for her for years. And so I was very motivated to be able to help people in the dying process, and as they were approaching death. We also help the family members, of course. So we help in ways that are practical, emotional, and spiritual. And what I find in our society is really, people don't want to talk about death. If you talk about death, they kind of like change the subject or they turn away, and it's just not a popular topic of conversation. So it's very uncomfortable because the emotions that come around death are fear, grief, loss, and also a lack of control. We can't control it. It's not in our hands, and it's very frustrating. So what we try to do as doulas is have conversations about death and dying, which is something we do in Gainesville every month. And just try to normalize talking about death and thinking about death. When in life, we prepare for various celebrations. We celebrate birth, marriage, we prepare with ceremony and things and food, graduations, bar mitzvahs, birthdays, anniversaries. We celebrate passages in life, transitions. And death, what about death? Not so much. So, but what happens is that when death catches us, and we are not prepared. There's great confusion and stress and anxiety and, oh my God, what do I do? And also the financial distress, because the funeral industry is designed to get a lot of money for helping us with this process. So in the reference list, there should be a number of books. The first one I'm going to talk about is, let's see if you can see this one, Caring for the Dying. And okay, so that's by Henry Fusco Weiss, and he is my teacher from Inelda. The quote from Henry is here, quote, "Death is like a dark and painful family secret that we try to keep hidden away. If we do think about it, we feel terribly vulnerable. Somehow we believe that not thinking about death will keep us safe and protect us from its truth and even from its inevitability. We're all gonna die, and we really don't want to. So what doulas can do is to help us prepare our lives so that we feel complete, or we feel safe, we feel that we've done what we could, and that if today was the day I was going to die, well, I feel like, okay, I did the best I could today. And our cultural norms include hiding from death and hiding from our negative emotions. It's acceptable to laugh and talk and be happy, but it's not acceptable to feel grief and sadness in our world. So the transition that I went through recently on March 29th, I was fired from my job in a hospital. I worked as a respiratory therapist, and often in my work, it was very troubling to me to be called into a code blue, where we had to do CPR and intubation on patients who really looked as though they just were trying to die. So that was always very difficult for me. The difference that I had with my hospital was that they were not allowing us to wear masks, and this was towards the end of March. And I disagreed with that, and basically we parted ways. So I miss being able to say goodbye to my friends that I worked with for 11 years, miss being part of that hospital team, but I'm also learning to go through this transition, and very grateful for the life that I do have, because it's taking me in different directions now. So advanced directives are important. There is a reference to a 13-minute YouTube video by Jim McDermott about advanced directives, and it's really quite a fun video to watch, so I recommend that. But that's where you have your paperwork, what you want at the end of life, and you also have a healthcare surrogate, someone who's going to represent you and help you get what you want, the treatment you do or do not want. The other book I have here, another book is The 5 Invitations by Frank Otoszewski, and it's a really good book. The quote I'm going to give you from Frank is, in medical school, he was trained, quote, to manage the dying, to prolong life whenever possible, and to control pain and suffering when it was not possible. The pain of survivors was the hardest to manage, but in time, most people took comfort in the thought of an afterlife and found a way to move on. So grief, there's often not much resource for grief in our society, but one thing we can do for each other is just hold space and be with each other when things are tough. We don't have to fix it. We don't have to interrupt their process. We can just be supportive. So I'm going to say, on a personal note, on February 11th, my daughter, who is the blonde in this picture, she died, and she had drug addiction. So she was found in her room, already dead, and she was taken to the coroner's office. And it was a big shock for me. I was grateful that I had Al-Anon at that time, and I still have Al-Anon. The peer support that we receive in that group is quite amazing. So the quote from the book there is, opening our hearts, transforming our losses. And one member says, I've learned so much about surviving loss, and I'm grateful to have found other souls with whom I can grieve and share my pain. Without Al-Anon, I don't believe I could have survived the loss of my son. So that is a great support to me. How much time do I have, Clinton?
Yeah, exactly 1 minute, Shanti.
Whole page. Okay, so basically go to the references and you'll see other books that have been helpful to me. But what I want to say is that there are so many topics that we can talk about, but in this day of COVID-19, we are not able to visit. I'm a hospice volunteer. I'm not able to visit my clients, but I can talk on the old-fashioned telephone. And the telephone is really a great tool. You don't have to be able to Zoom. You don't have to be able to do all this fancy stuff. Just pick up the phone and call your people. When you're thinking about them, it's time to call them. And I want to say that it's one thing to live alone, and it's another thing to live lonely. And it's one thing to die alone, but it's another thing to die lonely. And we get to not be lonely. That is a choice. It takes trusting someone and being willing to call someone. But this peer support is priceless, and it's there. So I just hope that people can benefit in some way from what we're going through right now. As hard as it is, there are gifts that we can find.
Yeah, and we all have gifts. And to echo that, actually, Shanti, I want to add not just to people that we professionally support, but to the people in our lives, kind of looking at those individuals and checking in with them on a regular basis and being receptive to them checking in with us as well on a regular basis.
Yeah, being a friend. Just be willing to be a friend. And if you care about them, check in with them and just give them your love. That's just one more thing. When it is time for a person to die, the most important thing is to have peace and to let them know that it's okay, that everything they've done up to this point is okay, and give them as much peace as possible. So.
Yeah, I think that's what we spoke about in part in our in the first webinar, is about legacy and kind of letting folks look at kind of where they are and what they have accomplished, and less about what they haven't accomplished, and appreciating their strengths and what they've done.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Thank So I'm going to open this up to some of our other presenters as far as what are some of the things as us as peer supporters, or not just peer supporters, but supporters as general, that we can do to assist people through transitions. I will also open this up to our attendees to put this into chats, but Celia or Richard or any of our other presenters. Oh, there you are, Celia. What are some things you recommend?
I have just, well, first of all, I always recommend peer support. If you can talk to someone and really be there for them, I think that's important. But the Office of Consumer Affairs came up with some grief resources, and I don't have them all together, but I can share it with you and Rita, and maybe you can get that out to everyone.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For anyone else, what are some of the important things that we can do to support people as they're going through transitions? And again, it's a lot of transitions we're going through. We're going through quarantine. We're going through professionally, for some folks not being employed, or professionally folks having to deliver services in a different way, or not having even the natural supports in the way that we used to. So I'm opening this up for anyone. And I see Michelle's come on. Michelle, you want to give us Hi.
Hey, Clinton. I just want to, I just want to summarize some themes that I heard from our discussion today, if that's all right,
Sure.
because there was some great wisdom, and that really reflects, I think, a lot about peer support, which is like the social connections kind of came out through every single sort of commentary. Also reconnecting to meaningful actions each day, things like offering kindness and being with someone. I also just love that quote. It's going to stick with me forever. I think peers can remind us of who we are, and that's a really important, valuable thing that we can offer other people, and a sense of community. Something else I want to highlight that Celia brought up kind of a little bit, I think, is ageism, and that peers, we really can be advocating for people when, this kind of idea of that person's too old, they can't do this, they can't do that. And also, what Shanti added, finding the gifts in the current situation, whatever they may be. So.
Great, thank you, Michelle. I think age is one of those things, it's a double-edged sword. When you're young, no one takes you seriously. Unfortunately, on the other side, when they consider age, what do they consider older adults to be, that your experience and your wisdom is not always valued. Liz, do we have any comments or questions coming up?
Wanted to, I think what Shanti shared really resonated with a lot of folks, because in the chat kind of blew up while she was speaking about just the cultural norms, as she expressed it, around talking about death and grief and loss. A lot of people in the chat sharing, their own losses and the importance of it. So I just want to make mention of that. And then just in general, to answer the question about peer support, being there for people, helping, being able to attentively listen, motivational interviewing, if appropriate, volunteering your time, assisting with arrangements around loss was something someone mentioned, that they were struggling to do that. So someone offered to help and was able to help them take care of things after a loved one had passed. Looking to see if there's any more. It really kind of resonated with me when Richard was talking about, baby boomers passing the torch down, because it's our generation theoretically that the torch is being passed down to. And while I'm not comfortable in admitting that I am an aging adult, according to all the paperwork in AARP, I am. So, and I just filled out my application to see what I'm going to get for that. But the types of transitions that I'm dealing with of just hitting that point in your life where any pre-existing health conditions that you may have had are becoming more pronounced as you start to get older. And I've been dealing with, I think, this virus, different opinions on that, and just have been sick for the last month, and just watching how autoimmune issues I've had and other health conditions are playing a role, just being mindful of the way that I don't bounce back the way that I used to. And it's a little bit more difficult now. And then also some of the other transitions is just my parents are baby boomers and my grandmother is in the silent generation, and trying to connect to my grandmother, who is not comfortable with technology, has been challenging. She, prefers good old-fashioned phone, but then she doesn't pick up when I call because my phone doesn't come up in her directory. So I try multiple times a day for that. Seeing more stuff in the chat. My idea was to connect. It goes by so fast. I apologize. I know you all are saying things, but the chat goes by so fast, and I may be missing some things.
Well, I think Richard wanted to add something, so let me, yep. Richard, if you're still on, connect, and then gives opportunity to kind of evaluate or look at what's in the chat. Richard, you still there?
Yes, I am, but my video is disabled.
That's okay.
My audio is not disabled. What just came up in terms of, first of all, we have never accepted that the AARP determines who's aging. Don't ever listen to them on that subject.
I do want their
Uh,
discount though. Is that okay, Richard? Can I still get the
That's
discount?
I have AARP too with the discounts.
Maybe it's worth nothing. I don't know, but I felt honored to get it in the mail. So
It's great.
yeah,
Yeah.
where I work, 70 is the new 40. But younger people as well face medical difficulties and sometimes social prejudice. As we age, we lose privilege and are subject more to discrimination, which we're also used to as being among the mentally challenged. One thing that Liz brought to my mind doesn't particularly have to do with any generation or age, is advocacy when you're dealing with the medical profession and our profession with mental health as well. We as we get older might lose a little bit of our determination not to be pushed around. We need to advocate for one another. We need to demand respect from our doctors and our caretakers. People in residences for the aging, often not very sensitive, but a little advocacy can go a long way, and peers are good at that.
I agree with you at 100,000%, Richard. And that's one of the things that we do at the Center for Rehab and Recovery, but also acknowledging that all the isms that exist and kind of fighting against them, including ageism, racism, poverty, all those different things kind of
Ableism.
and ableism. Yes, thank you. Those are all things that we need to constantly be advocating and making people aware about those disparities. So definitely thank you for that. Let's see. Any other comments, Liz, before I go on? And again, Richard, thank you so much for that.
yep, Richard's comments definitely resonate because a lot of folks have been responding to that, and some comments about advocacy, just some self-care tips, deep breathing and so forth. And some comments about we are a youth-centric culture, unlike other parts in the world. Very true. And that I think creates barriers that don't need to be there. Advocacy towards medical professionals, absolutely. It feels very, very relevant right now. Sorry, I'm having some tech issues. That's mostly what's in the chat.
Yeah, and I think I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that kind of where we are with COVID-19, that the populations at risk are the populations that are most likely facing oppression. Older adults, individuals of color, individuals in poverty, and kind of where the healthcare is. And as a supporter of folks, trying to figure out how to support folks who may feel that there isn't support. So again, thanks, Richard, for bringing that up. Yes, please.
This is Deb Trueheart. I could say a little something about ableism.
Go ahead.
I don't think I can get my video back on.
That's okay. Just really quick, we only have a couple minutes left,
Certainly.
unfortunately, Deborah.
Okay, just that, you know, as we're talking about the notion that seniors are sort of pushed aside, and I think a lot has to do with capacity. And like when you're healthy and when you have capacity and you have ability, it doesn't matter how old you are. I'm 68 and I can pretty much do, you know, what I need to do right now. But it wasn't always the case. There were a few years where I was dealing with multiple autoimmune issues, and before we found out sort of something that helped, I was on oxygen for a number of years. And so the way I was treated when I went out into public with an oxygen tank was totally different than the way I am treated now. Some of it is also about my own self-image, you know, that I felt like people were treating me like, oh, you poor little lady, you know, or, you know, dearie. When people call me dear, I get like, you know, and because it feels like it's condescending, you know, like the little old lady. And now I go out and I feel differently. I feel more vital, and I feel as though I'm treated totally differently. So I think that ableism is really tied very much into the way that people discount the older adult. I may be wrong about that, but.
I mean, I haven't seen the data around it, but I would agree.
That shift happened so fast too. It went from, you know, doctors looking at me and saying you're too young for that, to all of a sudden treating me differently. And obviously I didn't expect it. It was like overnight, like you hit a button, now you're considered old by medical professionals, and that's it, we're going to dismiss you. So that shift happens very quickly.
Did a wonderful job. You know, everybody give, you know, kind of the claps. There's a little thing for reactions down at the bottom, and one is a thumbs up and the other is a clap. So if everybody feels that Clinton did a great job of moderating this and everybody did a great job of presenting that, just go ahead and share your reactions. And I will go ahead and share my screen. And before I jump back into the PowerPoint, I wanted to mention a little something about our virtual community of practice, which is part of the Academy of Peer Services. We have a website that's a clearinghouse of information. And across the top of the screen, you'll see things like About Us, news. We put out newsletters. Now we're doing it almost 3 or 4 times a week. A calendar of events, research, and resources. And I especially wanted to highlight the resources that we've been building over the last couple of weeks. We have resources for the peer workforce, things from SAMHSA, things from the Office of Mental Health. I wanted to point out over here that we have the emotional support line, which is being staffed by peers for anybody who's going through emotional distress. It's not just people who have a diagnosis, but it's being staffed by peers and volunteers. And Celia mentioned an infographic on 10 tips for helping others to grieve. This has been, we put this up on our site this week when we got it through the Office of Mental Health. So these are just 10 tips for helping others to grieve whenever there's a loss due to COVID. So 1, immediately acknowledge the loss. 2, don't try to minimize or take away the pain. Statements like they're in a better place. Know the grief is linear. Focus on the person who's grieving. Don't judge how the bereaved is reacting. Don't rush the process and allow for crying. So I thought that was a wonderful, and lend a helping hand. And don't say, how can I help, but give very specific things that people can do to help each other. Because when you ask, how can I help, people may not know how you can help, but if you give them very specific things that you can do, then they can say yes or no to that. And then people forget to take care of themselves. So gift baskets, fruit baskets, food, those are all really good things to be able to share. But I wanted to point out mainly that these resources, as well as many of the online support groups that are happening right now. We've got online support groups that are happening in many of the organizations. So this is information on how to access them. We have our own support groups that we're offering, and I just wanted to give a quick let you know that we have a lot of resources available. So today's presenters were Gayle Bluebird, Celia Brown, Richard Laudor, Deb Trueheart, Shanti Vani, Michelle Zechner. These were our objectives: to define transitions, to identify some of the transitions people naturally go through as they age, to describe the benefits of peer support, and then discuss ways in which the transitions can enrich people's lives, which is something that Shanti had gone into. So I'll invite any questions or any comments or anything else into the chat. We do have a resource list that we have developed. Now, Shanti listed a number of books. Celia had the tips for handling grief. There's many, many resources that we've compiled into a resource list, including research that Michelle has provided to us about how peer support can help older adults. Now I want to give the floor to Deb Trueheart to talk a little bit more about emotional CPR. I'll put this up on the screen for just a moment so you can see what this is. Again, this information will be available in that resource file, and I will hand the baton over to Deb.
Thank you so much, Rita. I really appreciate the opportunity to just say a little bit more about emotional CPR. I think sometimes we have a little bit of a tension and that we hold attention in between, how do we support someone? Do we want to just be with them, or do we want to sort of help, give them motivational kinds of things? And I think emotional CPR for me just provides another level of how to be with someone. I was describing to someone recently that, I feel as though I'm a pretty intuitive person, and often when I am with someone that is needing some emotional support, there's all kinds of things that go on in my head. And I think, oh, I know what this person needs, or I know what's going on with this person. And I think that's pretty typical of what goes on inside of us as we support someone. The training in emotional CPR is, we talk about it as being available for any person, not someone who's, a therapist or a professional, but any person can learn how to be with another person who is having emotional distress. Sometimes they call that crisis, but any one of us in any particular moment can be in emotional distress. And right now, with all that's going on in the world, and all you have to do is look at your Facebook feed or watch the news for a little bit of time, and it's very easy to go into a place of emotional distress. And so what I want to show you is just a little bit about, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the workbook that we have for emotional CPR. And the purpose of emotional CPR says, we aspire to connect through feelings first, respecting each other as equally human, enabling us to be together without fixing, judging, or imposing our beliefs, allowing us to explore the unknown together in the present moment, releasing our power to create new voice, new purpose, and new hope.
Deb, would you mind just saying who published that book? Someone is asking, since you have it in your hand. Thanks.
Oh, this is the National Empowerment Center. It's the National Empowerment Center, and there is, it's on the, I think on that resource slide, there are websites. The Emotional CPR website is on that resource slide. And and what I want to say about emotional CPR, what makes it different than other peer support trainings, is that it's really about putting aside every single assumption, every single thing that you think you know, and just being totally present with another person. And this takes practice. It's not something we're used to doing. We're usually, when we communicate with someone, even in the discussion that that Gayle and I had earlier, it was, the conversation was here. It was, in our minds and, through our mouths, and this is where the conversation stayed. In emotional CPR, it's about really being with a person in a full-bodied way, being with a person mostly through the heart, through a heart connection where you're just totally present with another person. And it's an incredible gift. And it's a gift that was given to me many, many years ago before I was involved in the peer movement, before I knew anything. When my trauma stuff came up and hit the fan, I happened to go to a regular, a private therapist who did not take my insurance. So I was never, my trauma issues weren't labeled as mental illness. And this person just provided such intense presence with me and looked at me as if I was delightful, as if I was the most delightful creature on the planet. And I had no context for that because I was feeling like I was like broken and a mess and just really, I'm sure any of you that have had your trauma stuff come up know what I'm talking about. And this person looked at me and said, how natural that you would feel that way. How natural that you would want that. How natural that this is the way you would react. And so that's the kind of presence that we can bring with emotional CPR training. And what I wanted to really say is that right now we have a very unique opportunity, because normally when your organization wants to have an emotional CPR training, then there's a cost for bringing out the trainers, there's a location, there's food, there's all of this stuff that can be quite costly. Right now, the National Empowerment Center is offering, through their funding, Zoom ECPR trainings. They're 12-hour trainings, and they can be done, so you don't have to get everybody in the same room. It's really quite an opportunity. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little lost. I wanted to make sure and mention that there is actually extra funding for priority states. And I'm not sure if Rita, you got my list of what those priority states are, but New York and New Jersey are in that list of priority states. So they actually sort of go to the top of the list if someone says that they want a training in those areas. And we supply the trainer, the lead trainer, the assistant trainer, and also we can have apprentices if people want to learn how to become a trainer. So I just want to make that available to you, and it's an incredible opportunity right now. Thank you so much.
No, before Rita, before you get back on, I just want to kind of echo one of the statements that Deborah said about trauma and about how all of this could be perceived as traumatic for all of us. Whether you have a trauma history, whether you have mental health history, or you're experiencing this now as a trauma, and kind of how, again, at least in New York, having that choice and voice and having to live your life in a very different way than you're used to, and against your will, maybe kicking up a lot of things that some of the supports from emotional CPR might be useful for. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Rita.
I just want to say one more thing, and that's just that if you are interested in having an emotional CPR training, there is on that resource list, there's an info at email, and you can just email the National Empowerment Center your request.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and just pick up where we left off with the reference list will be available. We're going to, at the end, ask you to fill out a survey, and after you fill out the survey, you'll get something from Eventbrite that's just a follow-up to this meeting. When you get that, just please fill out the survey and give us feedback. Let us give really positive feedback or any feedback that you want to our presenters as well. And when you do that, then you'll be able to access the resource file. I wanted to mention that also, Michelle Zechner has joined us today. She actually did a two-part series on older adults with serious mental illness, an overview and strategies for programming. So there's 2 recorded webinars that Michelle did on her own. And she's an amazing researcher in this whole area of supporting older adults. So I just really encourage you to look up some of the research that she's done, to maybe tune into that webinar series as well to gain a little more information. I want to thank our moderators for today, Clinton Green and Liz Breier. We've been on this journey for about 6 months now, I think was when we first started this process of developing these webinars for older adults. And it's just been delightful to work with both Clinton and Liz and with the coalition itself. We're trying to form more partnerships with groups like the coalition and the New York City Peer Community Health Worker Workforce Consortium and a few other groups. So this has been just a really wonderful opportunity to work together.
Thanks, Rita.
Here's the contact information for Gayle, Celia, Richard, Deb, Shanti, and Michelle. And here is sort of our partnership, the coalition, the service program for older people, Rutgers, which is our managing sponsor for the Academy of Peer Services, the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center for the Northeast and Caribbean region, which is where Michelle did her webinars, Deb and Gayle, who have come alongside us on this journey, and it's just been wonderful to have them be part of this. I wanted to mention again the course on transforming lives through the arts. Today we close the Academy for a week because we do regularly scheduled maintenance, but come back a week from now and you'll be able to take that course, as well as 50 other courses in our Academy. And this program we're hoping this will be a continuing education offering. We're working with the certification board on that as well. And I wanted to thank Shanti for her, many wonderful insights through the International End-of-Life Doula Association and her experience in her own consulting firm, which is called Roots and Wings. And I also want to always thank the Office of Mental Health. We've been on this journey with OMH for about 2 years now, and they normally provide the technology platform and many of the people as part of these webinars. Of course, there's a lot going on with them right now, so we went ahead and used our own Zoom for now, but I'm looking forward to getting back to using the WebEx technology that OMH has offered. And I wanted to just give a really big shout out to Regina Schoen, who has been kind of our anchor within OMH. She's helped us through many of these webinars, and she's been along for the ride in developing this particular series too. So again, this is our Faces and Places of Peer Support webinar series. And we are the Academy of Peer Services. And you will be getting from Eventbrite just a quick how did we do survey. If you would please fill that out, that will give us feedback so that we can continue to grow and improve these trainings. I'll stop sharing now and allow anybody who has any last minute questions to either put them in the chat or presenters, anything you'd like to say. I got my butterfly on.
I'm looking in the chat. There's a lot of thank yous and requests for the information about the emotional CPR. Yeah, that seems to be about it. I apologize if I'm missing anything. The chat goes by very fast. So.
Also, again, the opportunity to thank all of our presenters. Number one, for sharing all of your experiences and insights, as well as everyone who contributed in the chat, as my 8-year-old is running around doing butterfly things.
Butterfly hugs.
Yeah.
Butterfly hugs.
Yeah, well, he was flying. But thank all of all of our attendees from apparently a lot of very different places for contributing as much as they felt comfortable doing, and being vulnerable as much as they would like themselves to be. I think we all, I am being presumptuous and speaking for all our presenters, we appreciated your capacity and willingness to be vulnerable and sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thanks, everyone. And this is Celia Brown. I thought this was a wonderful webinar. And yeah, I have been thinking about older adults for a while, and you guys have been doing this series, which has been great. And so thank you for including me. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you for joining us, Celia. Thank you everyone for joining us. Bluebird and Deb, just thank you again for 2 amazing real plays and just showing us what support looks like. I think what I've seen in both in the chat and in the prior session feedback was that was the most powerful part that people got out of it. They got the most out of that. And so thank you so much for coming on and doing that. And Shanti, I think there was one thing that I wanted to ask you to share, if you would, and that was the one story you told me about the one person you couldn't get to, but you were able to help the family find closure. Could you just tell that story?
Thank you.
That just
Thank
really...
you for, yeah, I was really regretting not having 2 minutes to share about that. So I have a friend who in 2018 in September called me and she said, my mother's in the hospital, I need some help. So I went to the hospital and visited with her and the mother and the 2 granddaughters. And the difficulty was that this woman had a mental health issue and she was a Holocaust survivor. So she had been all her life paranoid and worried that everybody was trying to kill her, including her daughter, who was a very kind and caring daughter, but could only do so much for her mom. So what ended up happening is they never called me back. They didn't want to talk about death. So then this February they called me and they said, she said, my mom's been on a ventilator for 6 days in the hospital. She has lung issues. She has dementia and please help me. So my first thought was, dang, we could have been working on this for the whole past year. What do you expect me to do? That was my thought. I didn't say that, fortunately. And then I thought, no, I can help them. So I met with them for 2.5 hours at the hospital and just helped them to review her situation, her medical, emotional situation. She had no advanced directives. And so all I really did was have that 2.5 hour visit with them, but it helped them to clarify some of the things that they wanted to do. And one was something that I wouldn't have done myself, which was to still not have her as a DNR, even though I thought she was pretty much in end stage, but they were still going to do CPR one more time. And so my job was, as Deb was talking about, is to just be there for them where they are, not to impose my views on them, but we can meet people where they are, and it was just very powerful. I actually heard about her death at the end of March through Facebook. They didn't contact me, but for the little bit of time that we were together, perhaps I was of some help to them. So the end-of-life doula work is amazing. People don't really think they need it or they want to wait, but there's a whole lot to it, and that was the Nazi Holocaust survivor, and the suffering around that was very impactful for me. So it was good to be able to help them just a little bit. Yeah.
I think you also, at the end, you saw them as a family and you lifted their spirits just by saying, you are a family. You're.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I did see the father and the sister and brother standing next to him. And I just said, what a beautiful family you are, despite everything they've been through, just in that moment to acknowledge love that was right there. And that's the idea, that whatever our last thoughts are our most important thoughts. So we need to stay positive and encourage people, even when they're struggling, especially when they're struggling.
Thank you, Shanti. And thank you everyone for being here today. This has been a wonderful webinar. I just really appreciate all of our presenters, all of our partners, and really all of you for coming in and being a part of this and for contributing to the chat. We'll look forward to another one in the near future. It's not yet been scheduled, but we're hoping it will be within the month. And we'll be sending out information about that soon. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.